remember the exact moment it all started. It was a dry September morning in Flagstaff, Arizona. The air was cool, but carried the weight of the desert sun, and the streets were unusually quiet for a Friday. I had not slept the night before. Not well, anyway. For the past several weeks, something had been gnawing at the edges of my mind, like a whisper just out of reach. My name is Patrick Dawson. I am 31 years old, and I teach anthropology at Northern Arizona University. My life had always been quiet, predictable. Lecture halls, stacks of essays, late nights with books older than the buildings that held them. I had no family left, no real friends to speak of, and I preferred it that way. At least, I used to. It began with a package. No return address. Just my name, etched in black ink on brown paper, the handwriting shaky and narrow. It was waiting on my doorstep when I returned from campus. I should have ignored it. Every part of me knew it. But curiosity has a way of pulling you closer, even when you smell the rot. Inside the box was a key, not an ordinary key, though at first glance it appeared old, iron, maybe early 20th century. Attached to it was a torn piece of yellowed paper with a single word written in red ink. Jericho. I sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at the key. There was no explanation, no instructions, no context. Jericho. The name repeated in my head over and over until it sounded alien. I opened my laptop and searched for any mention of it in Arizona. There was a ghost town by that name, about 2 hours northeast. Nothing more than crumbling walls and a forgotten graveyard now. No one had lived there in decades. Something inside me shifted. A pull. I cannot explain it. The rational part of me, the academic, told me it was just coincidence. A prank, maybe. But there was another part of me, a buried thing, that had begun to stir. That night, I dreamed of soil. Deep red earth stretching endlessly beneath a sky, with no stars. I was walking barefoot through the dust, and the wind whispered names I could not understand. In the distance, I saw a structure. A tall black house with no windows. Its door was open, and the key I had been given was in my hand. I woke up gasping for air, the taste of copper in my mouth. My sheets were soaked through. My heart felt like it had been running for hours. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream. But when I walked into the living room, the key was on the coffee table where I had left it, and the scrap of paper had changed. Now it read, "The first door opens." I did not go to work that day. I got into my car, drove to the nearest gas station, filled the tank, and headed north. The desert stretched out on either side of me, an ocean of dust and heat. I passed only a handful of cars as I followed the broken road into the hills. My GPS could not find Jericho, but I followed the vague directions I had pieced together from old forums and backwater maps. 2 hours later, I arrived, or at least, I thought I had. There was nothing but silence. The town, if you could call it that, was nothing more than bones. Half a dozen buildings slouched in the dirt, roofs caved in, windows shattered. Time had eaten everything but the wind and the dust. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt it again, the pull. I walked slowly through what had once been a main street. There were remnants of signs, broken lamps, a rusted wagon wheel, and then I saw it, tucked between 2 collapsed structures was a small stone building. Its door was intact, no windows, just stone and shadow. The moment I saw it, I knew this was the place from my dream. My hands trembled as I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock like it had always belonged there. I hesitated only a second before turning it. The door opened inward with a groan that seemed too loud for the silence around it. Inside, it was pitch black. The air smelled of damp earth and something older, something sweet and spoiled. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. There was no light, none, not even the sliver of sun from outside had followed me in. I stood frozen, heart hammering, breathing the thick, ancient air. Then I heard it. A voice, not outside, not in my ears. It was inside my head. It said my name, not shouted, not whispered. It knew me. Then came the scratching, first distant, then closer. The sound of fingernails against stone. I backed into a wall, pressing my palms against the cold surface. The voice continued, speaking in a language I did not know, but somehow understood. It spoke of sacrifice, of cycles, of a door beneath all doors, and then a light came on, faint, flickering, a lantern, hanging from a chain in the center of the ceiling. The room was circular. The walls were covered in carvings, ancient symbols and faces twisted in silent screams. And across from me, another door. This one wooden, with 7 locks embedded into its frame. One of them clicked open. I ran. I do not remember reaching my car. I do not remember the drive back. But when I got home, it was night, and the key was gone. But in its place, on the floor of my apartment, lay a second scrap of paper. It read, "The second key awaits and..." The whisper came again. "Patrick, you are awake now and you can never go back. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford." Every time I closed my eyes, I was pulled back into that stone room. The scratching sound had returned, louder each time, closer. The whispers no longer waited until sleep. They came in the shower, while I drove. During office hours when students asked me about exam schedules, my name, repeated over and over, like a mantra spoken by something that wanted to be remembered. 3 days passed before the second key arrived. It was left on the passenger seat of my car. I do not know how it got there. I had locked the doors. There was no sign of forced entry. And yet, when I sat down and looked to my right, there it was. A smaller key this time, made of copper, warmer to the touch. The note that accompanied it simply said, "He sees you now." I began researching obsessively. I combed through university archives, rare book collections, even private forums that delved into fringe occult theories. I found references to a cult that had once existed in the Four Corners region. They called themselves the Vale of Elohim, supposedly disbanded in the early 1900s after a series of strange disappearances. Their writings spoke of dreamwalk, doorways between states of consciousness, and a place beneath memory where time cannot reach. I found no mention of keys, no mention of Jericho, but I did find a photograph. It was buried deep in the personal files of a retired professor who had gone missing in 1983, a grainy black and white image, taken with an old Polaroid. It showed a stone room with a wooden door and 7 locks, the same room I had entered. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the copper key. It pulsed faintly in the light. I decided to test something. I placed the key in the center of the table and turned off every light in the apartment. Then, I waited. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, the key began to hum. It vibrated slightly, spinning in a slow circle. Then it stopped, pointing east. I packed a bag. By morning, I was on the road again, this time heading toward Grants, New Mexico. I did not know what I was looking for, only that the pull had returned, stronger than before. I arrived in Grants just before sundown. It was a small town nestled in the desert, surrounded by craggy hills and forgotten mines. I checked into a motel, paid in cash, and asked the clerk if there were any old churches nearby. He mentioned an abandoned mission a few miles out, along a dirt road no one used anymore. I found it easily, a crumbling stone chapel. Its bell tower cracked and blackened by lightning. The windows were boarded up. The front doors barely hung on their hinges. As I stepped inside, the wind stopped. No birds, no insects, no sound. It was like the world outside had turned off. I made my way toward the altar. Behind it was a stairwell, choked in shadow, leading downward into what must have once been the crypt. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, I found another door, wooden, identical to the first, but this time, only 6 locks remained. One had already clicked open. I reached for the key. The moment the copper touched the lock, I heard it footsteps, not from behind, from within the walls. Then came the voice again, clearer than ever before. It did not speak words this time. It breathed. The key clicked. The door remained closed, but something stirred on the other side. I turned to run, but the stairs were gone. In their place stood a figure, thin, too thin. Its skin clung tightly to bone, and its face had no eyes, just a mouth stretched far too wide. It did not speak. It moved. I backed away, searching for anything to defend myself with, but there was only stone and rot. The figure stepped closer. Its limbs jerked unnaturally, like a marionette with tangled strings. Then it stopped. It reached up with one skeletal hand and placed a finger over where its lips should have been. Silence. The room shifted. The walls began to breathe. I could feel it. A heartbeat not my own pulsed through the stone. And then the creature vanished. I found myself back in my car. No memory of leaving the chapel. The copper key was gone. In its place was another piece of paper resting on the dashboard. The third door waits beneath. I was losing time, losing sense of what was real. Back at the motel, the clerk did not remember checking me in. My room key no longer worked. My name was not in the registry. I showed him my ID. He looked at it and said he had never seen me before in his life. I drove through the night. The stars looked wrong. The road felt longer than it should have. And at every gas station, every diner, every rest stop, I saw him, the hollowman, standing at the edge of my vision, watching, waiting. He never moved, but each time I blinked, he was closer. I knew then this was not just about keys. This was not about dreams or forgotten cults. Something had been watching long before. The first key arrived, and now it was moving closer. I drove east without stopping. I did not know where I was going anymore. Only that every turn of the wheel, every mile of asphalt beneath my tires, felt like a descent. The world had started to peel apart. Street signs flickered between names I recognized and ones that could not have existed. The faces of strangers changed mid-conversation. I saw reflections in store windows that did not match the people standing in front of them. The further I traveled, the more wrong everything became. I ended up in Cimarron, New Mexico, a town with less than 1,000 residents, nestled at the edge of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It was there, parked beneath a flickering streetlight, that I found the third key. It was lying on my windshield, pinned beneath a dead raven. The bird had no eyes. Its wings were spread wide, its beak frozen mid-scream. The key was gold, not shiny, dull, and ancient, like it had been buried in a graveyard for centuries. There was no note this time, only silence. I left the raven where it was. I took the key and drove to the edge of town, where the road curved into a dense thicket of pine. My phone had long since lost signal. My GPS was stuck in a loop, constantly recalculating without direction. The map was useless, but I remembered something years ago. While researching a case of indigenous burial sites being unearthed by oil surveyors, I had stumbled upon a reference to a cave system northeast of Cimarron. Locals called it the Mouth of the Wounded. No records of it existed in official archives. Just folklore and warnings from people who refused to talk after sunset. It took me hours to find it, hidden behind a curtain of brush and stone. The entrance yawned like a broken mouth, teeth of jagged limestone grinning in the dark. My flashlight flickered as soon as I stepped inside. The air was thick and wet, humming with a low vibration that made my teeth ache. I descended into the dark. The walls were lined with old carvings, symbols that moved when I stared at them too long, faces without eyes, spiral patterns that seemed to tighten the longer I looked. Somewhere deep inside the cavern, I found water. A narrow pool, black and still, stretched across a chamber the size of a cathedral. Above it, high on the far wall, was another door, wooden 6 locks. 2 now clicked open, I stepped to the edge of the water. My reflection stared back at me, but its eyes were hollow. Its mouth twitched in ways mine did not. I took the key and approached the door. As I reached out, the water erupted. Something pulled itself from the depths. It had no name, no shape that should exist in this world. Limbs like serpents, skin that shimmered with dead light. Its head was a mass of writhing mouths. It did not attack. It only watched. A chorus of voices rose from it, layered and fractured. You were not meant to open this. You were not meant to see. I pushed the key into the third lock. The sound it made was not mechanical. It was biological. Like something inside the door shifted, sighed and took a breath. The creature in the water shrieked. The cave trembled. Water rose. I turned and ran. The path behind me was gone. The tunnel had changed. I followed new corridors, guided only by instinct and the growing hum in my chest. The deeper I ran, the louder it grew, until finally, I stumbled into a narrow passage and found myself in a room that should not have existed. There were no walls, just void, and in the center of that nothingness stood a single figure, the hollow man. He was closer now. I could see the texture of his skin, paper thin, stretched over bones too long and too sharp. His mouth was open, but he did not speak. He moved his hand, and a flood of images hit me like a scream. Children screaming beneath black sun's door, built from the bones of 1,000 dreamers. The face of my mother. Though she had died 15 years ago, her eyes bleeding shadows. He showed me myself split open and raveled and done, and then I was back in my karmi, mouth full of dirt, my hands shaking. There was a fourth scrap of paper on the seat beside me. The dreamer wakes. My nose began to bleed. My vision blurred. I looked in the mirror and saw that my eyes had turned black. No whites, no color, just void. I blinked, and they returned to normal for now. At the edge of the mirror, I saw him again, the hollow man. He raised one hand, held up 4 fingers, and then dropped. 133 keys opened 4. Remain. I was running out of time. Reality was bending, and I had the growing certainty that if I opened the 7th door, there would be no coming back. 3 days passed after the cave. At least, I think it was 3. Time had become slippery. My phone's clock spun wildly. The calendar app crashed every time I opened it. And when I asked a stranger for the date in a diner just outside of Trinidad, Colorado, he looked at me like I had asked what color his bones were. He blinked, opened his mouth to speak, and then walked out without saying a word. I stopped asking after that. The bleeding had not stopped. Small at first, a trickle from the nose, a smear on my pillow, but then came the coughing. Black fluid, thick and tar-like. I woke up in the middle of the night, choking on it. The mirror above the motel sink showed a face that was still mine, but less so. My eyes would occasionally shift without my control. Too wide, the pupils too thin. Something inside me was changing, and the key was burning. The 4th key arrived during a thunderstorm. I had taken shelter in an abandoned fire lookout tower deep in the hills west of La Veta. The place smelled of ash and old paper. I built a small fire in the rusted stove and tried to sleep. I woke up with the key on my chest. This one was bone, not carved or etched, just a clean sliver of curved white, warm to the touch. On the floor beside me, drawn in black ash, was a perfect circle. Inside it, a name. Elias Trotsky. I recognized the name. Barely. He had once been a professor at the University of Chicago, an expert in dream phenomena, archetypes, and metaphysical folklore. 20 years ago, he had vanished during an expedition in Utah. His final lecture had been scrubbed from the university's archive, but I had read pieces of it in fringe journals, and poorly photocopied signs circulated among graduate students. He had spoken of a place called the Inner Labyrinth. He claimed it was not a metaphor. He claimed to have found its entrance. I drove through the night to the edge of Utah, guided by little more than scattered notes, and an instinct I had stopped trusting, but could no longer resist. The sun rose behind me as I reached a narrow canyon. just west of Capitol Reef National Park. There was no path, no markers, just a thin line of cracked stone leading into the earth. I walked for what felt like hours. The canyon narrowed, the wind disappeared. Then the humming began again, not from outside, from within my skull. The sound made my teeth itch, and then I saw it, carved into the stone, tall as a house, was a door. The fourth door, 4 locks, 3 already open. I approached with the bone key. My hand trembled. The moment it touched the final lock, something behind the door moved. It laughed, not a laugh like a man. Something deeper, older, like the sound of light. Breaking the lock clicked, and the world fractured. I was no longer in the canyon. I was in a long, empty hallway. The floor was polished marble. The walls were lined with mirrors, and in each mirror was a different version of me. Some wept, some bled. One was screaming silently, pounding its fists against the glass. At the far end of the hallway stood Elias Trask. He looked no older than 50. His beard was grayer than his photographs, but his eyes were alive with a madness I recognized. "You found it?" nodded. "What is this place?" "This is where I ended. This is where you begin." He walked toward me, but his reflection did not move. It stayed frozen in the glass, smiling. "You do not belong here yet." Patrick I opened the 4th door. "You think the doors are in the earth." He leaned in close. "They are in Y." Stepped back. "You opened them when you began to remember. When you stopped pretending the dreams were just dreams. When you let the hollow man in." "What is he?" "He is not a man then." "What is he?" He is the sound that follows silence, the shape that remains when you close your eyes. He is what waits when memory fails. You let him through. I did not invite him, but you dreamed of him." Elias turned, gesturing to one of the mirrors. "Look in the glass." I saw myself as a child, 8 years old, sleeping in my childhood bedroom in Cedar Rapids. A shape stood beside the bed, tall, thin. Watching it was him. I had forgotten. He was always there. He always waited for the dreamer to remember. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to me. Inside was a notebook, leather-bound, worn and stained. This belonged to the first dreamer. Who was he? She was a child from Missouri, 7 years old, blind from birth. She dreamed of the doors. Before she could speak what happened to her, she opened the 7th, and now nothing forgets. Elias began to fade. His skin became smoke. His bones turned to ash. Remember, the doors are not passageways. They are choices. Each one makes you less. Each one shows them more. Then he was gone. I was standing in the canyon again. The bone key was gone, but the notebook remained in my hand. On the first page, written in a careful, childlike scrawl, was a sentence that chilled my blood more than anything I had seen before. "You cannot wake up until you die." The notebook smelled like mildew and ash. Its pages were brittle, many torn or stained. The ink faded in places like it had been soaked in water or blood. I read every page. Some were drawings crude, chaotic depictions of figures without faces, animals with too many eyes, buildings twisted like knots. Others were fragments of memory. Words like "he watches from the corners," "we are dreams of something else," and "the sky is wrong down here," repeated over and over in the margins. But it was the final entry that told me where to go next. "The girl is still inside the place where they kept her. They said it was condemned, but it never was, because it was never built. Find the house that cannot be seen." Below the passage was an address, or part of one. Old Orchard County line, Wyoming, Field 29. There was no such county on any map, but through enough digging, calling libraries, old zoning offices, historical archives, I found a reference to a psychiatric complex that had been proposed in 1952, slated for construction near a rural highway outside of Whitland, Wyoming, but there were no records of it being built. No land deeds. No blueprints. No purchase of equipment or staff hiring notices. And yet, there were rumors. Old farmers. Remembered trucks that came in the night. Construction equipment appearing and vanishing. One man claimed he heard screams in the wheat fields after sundown, echoing from nowhere. They said the ground swallowed the building. I drove straight through to Whitland. The roads narrowed as I left town. Dirt turned to gravel. Fields stretched into eternity, golden and brittle beneath the sun. There were no signs, just numbers painted on splintered wooden stakes at the edge of each field. Field 29 came just before dusk. There was nothing there, just wheat, tall, dry, and rustling in the wind. But when I stepped out of the car, the sound changed. The rustling stopped. The wind kept blowing, but the wheat stood perfectly still. I stepped forward. The wheat did not part. It retreated, bent itself back in a circular path, revealing a trail that had not been there a moment before. I followed. 100 yards in, I saw it. A structure, not decayed, not abandoned, whole, solid, stone and metal and wire, 3 stories tall, windows without glass, a front door covered in rusted chains. I reached for the 4th key. It was no longer in my pocket. Instead, the door unlatched itself. It welcomed me. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The hallways were too long. The walls had no seams. The air carried no echo. Each room I passed was filled with silence, so heavy it made my ears ring. And then I heard her, a voice, small, soft. She is still asleep. She is still asleep. Pie turned no one. She dreams of open skies. Another voice. They came from everywhere, above, beneath, behind. The girl is not gone. They all said the same thing, over and over again. The girl is not gone. 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 And then, I found her room. There was no number, no door, just a slit in the wall, like a mouth torn open. Inside, the air was warm and sticky. The smell of iron and decay filled my throat. In the center of the room, on a bed made of stone, lay the girl, still 7 years old, eyes closed, breathing alive. A halo of black threads floated above her head, twisting and knotting into strange geometries. And beside her stood the hollow man. He turned when I entered. He did not smile. His body shivered without moving. You are too close. I took a step forward. What is she? She is the one who opened. Without knowing the one they cannot unsee. Is she still here? She has not finished dreaming, and if she wakes then. The 7th opened. She stepped aside. Let me show you. He extended a hand. For a moment, I could not move. Then I took it, and we fell. Not down, inside. We fell through ourselves, through dreams that were not mine, through memories that belonged to the girl. 1,000 doors flashed before me, burning cities, frozen oceans, forests filled with mirrors, a planet split in half by something that had no face but a voice made of glass, and then darkness, pure and absolute. The hollow man whispered, "Do you see now?" I nodded. This is what waits on the other side then. Why let me get this far? Because you were chosen, because you are not dreaming anymore. I opened my eyes. I was still in the room. The girl still slept. The hollow man was gone, but in his place was another key, this one black. The surface shimmered like oil, cold to the touch, and next to it, etched into the stone in perfect block letters, "You have passed the point of forgetting." As I walked out of the asylum that was never built, the building began to fade behind me. With each step it grew less real. By the time I reached the road, it was gone. There was no wheat field, only dust, only silence, and in the distance, I saw the sky ripple like water. I drove without direction. Each town felt like a replica of one before it. Gas stations where the cashiers never blinked. Motels that smelled like bleach and smoke, where every room had the same faded painting of a lighthouse. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. The hollow man had done something to my mind in the asylum. I no longer trusted my own thoughts. The black key sat in the passenger seat. It pulsed softly. I tried to throw it out the window once, in a moment of panic. It reappeared on the dashboard an hour later, wet with something I could not identify. There were no more letters, no more clues, only the key dot, and then the dreams changed. No longer places, no longer symbols or impossible creatures or vast doorways now. I was a child again, 8 years old, lying in a hospital bed in Cedar Rapids Mercy Medical Center. I was sick, pale, hooked to machines. My parents were there. They held my hand. My mother sang lullabies. My father read from books. I remembered none of it until now, but something was wrong. Every time the dream reached a certain moment, when the nurse entered the room, I woke up screaming, because the nurse was not human, not anymore. Her eyes were solid black, her mouth too, wide, and behind her, just outside the room, the hollow man waited, always just out of reach, until the 6th night. This time, I did not wake. This time I followed him. I stepped out of the hospital room and into a corridor that stretched too far, in both directions. There were no other doors, only flickering lights above. The hollow man turned to me. "You are beginning to remember." Signal he walked ahead. "You were being prepared for what to open." I followed him down the hall. My hospital gown dragged behind me. My feet left bloody footprints on the floor, though I felt no pain. We reached a door, not a normal one. It was alive, flesh and bone and teeth. It breathed. I held up the black key. The door opened, and inside was not a room. It was a memory, but not mine. I was standing in a house I had never seen before. Old, dusty. The wallpaper was peeling. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it gave off no heat. Sitting on a couch was a man. He looked like me, but older, worn, broken. He turned and met my eyes. "I have waited so long. Who are you? You know who I am." He stood and approached, and I saw it. He was me, but not from this life. Another version, another outcome. I failed. What, to stay asleep? He handed me a photograph. It showed the same house, but newer, warm. A woman smiling, a child in her arms. They are not real. They weren't, till I remembered he pointed to a mark on my neck. It burned. "You let the 6th door open. I did not choose this, none of us do." He gestured around the house. This was my cage, my lie, my perfect dream. What happened? The hollow man came. He always comes when you start asking what you forgot. Looked at the photo again. The woman's eyes were bleeding. The child had no face. Then everything vanished. I woke up in my motel room, drenched in sweat. The black key lay on my chest. Next to it, a piece of paper typed, "Do not go back to Cedar Rapids. If you do, the door will follow, and you will not come out alone." I stared at the ceiling for hours. I did not remember writing the note, but I recognized the typewriter font, the same my father used on the old machine in our basement. I thought I had dreamed that, too. But the basement was real. The typewriter was real. The door under the stairs was real, and I had never opened it. I packed my bag and got in the car. I drove east, toward Cedar Rapids, toward the house I had left behind, toward the 7th door. And as I crossed the Iowa border, the sky turned the color of bruises, the wind stopped, and the black key whispered in my pocket. The first thing I noticed when I reached the old house in Cedar Rapids was that it had not aged. Not one shingle out of place, not one crack in the concrete. Steps. The same garden hose, still coiled by the porch. The wind chimes, untouched by rust, clinked gently in wind I could not feel. No one had lived here in 20 years. Not since the fire. But the house looked exactly as it did when I left as a boy. That was the first lie. The second was the welcome mat. It was clean, and it said my name. Patrick. I stepped onto the porch. The door unlocked before I touched it. The hallway smelled like cinnamon. Like childhood. I walked slowly, past framed pictures that should not have been there. Photos of me at ages I never reached. 17, 25, 30. Standing next to people I did not know, laughing, smiling, holding hands with a woman I had never met. One photo in particular made me stop. It showed me and my parents. Sitting in this very living room, my father's hand rested on my shoulder. My mother's eyes were full of pride, except my parents had died in the fire, and I had never taken that photo. The hallway darkened behind me. The floorboards creaked in, a pattern that felt deliberate, like footsteps that did not belong to me. I turned the corner and saw the basement door. It was wide open. There were no lights. The black key pulsed in my hand. I descended. Each step down felt like falling deeper into my own skull. I passed old holiday decorations, broken toys, empty picture frames. And then I saw the typewriter, still sitting on the desk in the far corner. A single sheet of paper was already in place, typed in the same blocky font. Welcome back, door 7 awaits you. Reached under the stairs. There was a hatch there, a panel I had always assumed led to plumbing or wiring, but now it was a door. It did not exist when I was a child, and yet I remembered it. I remembered hiding behind it when the fire started, when the smoke crawled down my throat and the screams of my parents were swallowed by something much louder. I put the key into the lock. It turned. The hatch opened inward, revealing a narrow tunnel carved into dirt. The walls were not supported. The ceiling dripped. I crawled inside. The moment I passed through, I was no longer in the house. I was in a corridor that stretched in both directions. Identical doors lining the sides. All numbered 7. Every single one. Each door had a different sound behind it. One echoed with laughter. One with a baby crying. One with thunder that never stopped. One with silence so thick I thought I had gone deaf. I chose the one with no sound at all. As I reached for the knob, someone whispered in my ear, "We are not." Patrick, I froze. The voice was mine, but wrong. I turned around. There was no one there, but I was no longer wearing the clothes I had entered with. I wore a hospital gown again. My feet were bare. The corridor had changed. The walls now pulsed. Veins throbbed beneath the surface, like the whole place was alive. I opened the door. Inside was a hospital room, the same one from my dreams. I was lying in the bed, unconscious, pale. A breathing machine clicked and hissed. My parents stood at the window, talking to a doctor. But they were wrong. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. The doctor's face was a blur. The nurse entered, the one with the black eyes, and the hollow man followed behind. He walked up to the bed, not the real one, the one that held me, the sleeping me, and he placed something on my chest, a key. Gold. He turned to face me. "You cannot hold both truths." Sai stepped forward. "What am I? First and the last, the dream and the dreamer." He took the black key from my hand and crushed it. It vanished into smoke. "You are almost ready for what to wake." I blinked, and I was standing in the burned-out ruins of the house. The roof had caved in. The basement had collapsed. Smoke filled my lungs, and beneath the ash, I felt something press against my foot. I bent down and uncovered it. A 7th key, this one white, cold as ice. I looked around. No one, only the sound of wind against charred wood. I walked out of the ruins and saw a figure at the end of the street. A man, tall, motionless, his face hidden beneath a hat. The hollow man watched me without moving. I raised the key, and he raised his hand. There were 6 keys hanging from his fingers, and one empty space, where the 7th would go. The 7th key burned, cold in my hand. I left Cedar Rapids before the sun rose. The ruins of the house still smoked in my rearview mirror, but what haunted me more was the road ahead. The hollow man had shown himself not to threaten me, but to remind me. The game was almost over, and I had not even learned the rules. I drove west with no map and no destination. The white key pulled at my chest like a magnet. It wanted something, somewhere, and I could feel it, buried just under my ribcage, growing heavier the farther I drove. Like a part of me had been hollow this whole time and was finally being filled by the time I reached Colorado. The nightmares had returned, but they were no longer dreams, they were lives. Each night I closed my eyes, I woke in someone else's skin, a girl, hiding under a bridge as something dragged its teeth across the concrete above her, a boy holding a dead dog, whispering to it as shadows whispered back, a woman standing in front of a mirror for hours, waiting for her reflection to move first. Each time I woke, I found scratches on my arms, mud under my nails, hair that did not match my own stuck to my pillow, and then came the 8th name, carved into the inside of my windshield. Sarah Griggs. It was burned into the glass. Not written, not etched, burned, and somehow I remembered her, but not from this life, from the dream. She was one of the children buried beneath the field, one of the kids who had never been found. She had followed me through the second door. I had heard her crying. Now she was calling me back. I found the town in Nevada where she had gone missing, a place so small it was not on most maps. Gerlach, one gas station, one diner, one sheriff's office. The deputy behind the desk looked at me like he already hated me. "You looking for trouble or making IT?" asked about Sarah Griggs. His jaw tightened. Old case, she was never found, still missing. She ever live here whole life. He told him I was a writer, doing research on forgotten towns and unsolved cases. He did not believe me, but he gave me the address. Her house had been abandoned for 20 years, but when I stepped inside, the lights flickered on. The furniture was still in place, a single plate on the table, as if someone had just stepped away, and in the corner of the room, drawn in chalk on the wall, was a door, roughly sketched, but detailed. A keyhole had been smudged out by a small hand. I touched the drawing. The wall was cold. The key in my pocket pulsed. I placed it against the chalk, and the wall opened, not like a secret passage, like flesh splitting apart. Inside was darkness, not just the absence of light, a darkness that pushed back. I stepped through and fell, not downward, not sideways. I fell inward, through myself, and landed in a room filled with mirrors. Each one reflected a version of me, some younger, some older. One of them was not human. Its eyes were empty, its mouth never closed. In the center of the room was Sarah Griggs, but not as a child, as an old woman, bent, fragile. Her eyes were sewn shut. She turned toward me as if she could see. I waited. "For you, how long? Too long. What is this place? This is where forgotten dreams rot." She stood, her skin cracked. "You left me in the second door." I did not know. "You knew enough to run." She reached toward me. Her hand brushed my chest. The white key flew from my pocket and hovered between us. "This is the last one then. Let me out too. Cannot save me, weeby, 'cause I am you." She placed her hand over mine, and her skin flaked away. Beneath it was my own. I screamed and pulled back. The mirrors shattered. I was alone. The white key clattered to the ground. I picked it up and found myself back in the house, back in the living room. Only now, the walls were covered in writing, over and over. A single sentence. I remember it was written in dozens of different hands, some childlike, some jagged, some not human, and I understood then. Each key was a memory, not mine. There's the children, the missing, the ones who had been consumed by the hollow man. He did not just make people forget. He fed on what we could not remember, and the more we forgot, the stronger he became. I held the 7th key in one hand, the 8th in the other. Only one door remained. I had to go back to where it started, the hospital, the room with my name, where I had never truly woken up. I arrived back in Wichita, Kansas, just after midnight. The hospital sat on the hill like it had never changed. Same cracked sign, same humming, buzz from the flickering lot lights, same empty lobby. The name on the front had long since faded, but I still remembered it. Even after all these years, St. Vincent's Memorial it had been closed for decades. Shut down after a string of disappearances, electrical failures, and whispers the press refused to print. I had been here once, as a child, after the fire, but I had never left. That was the lie, and this was where it began. The front door opened before I touched it. Inside, the walls peeled like old skin. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in hallways that bent at impossible angles. Fluorescent lights flickered but never turned on. I walked without fear. Fear had stopped being useful. The keys were hot in my pocket. All 8. They vibrated as I moved through the dark, as if drawing closer to something ancient and alive. Then I heard the music, a piano playing slowly, off-key, a lullaby I could almost place. Twinkle, twinkle, no, that was not it. It was the tune from my dreams, always playing when the hollow man was near. The hallway opened into the main ward, and there, I saw room 212. My name was still on the clipboard outside. Patrick Wilder, status induced coma, date admitted. 1995. I reached for the handle, but there was no handle, no door, just a blank wall. The keys in my pocket dug into my flesh like teeth. One by one, they rose into the air and embedded themselves into the wall. Each key twisted, the wall cracked, and the door bled open. I stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered. Beige walls, drip machine, a body on the bed. My body, older, frailed wires in every limb. Tubes down the throat, eyes fluttering beneath paper-thin lids. A nurse stood by the monitor, but it was not a nurse. Its face was featureless, only a mouth, no lips, just an open circle. The hollow man, he turned toward me, but did not move, only spoke. You are not ready. I am not asking. If you wake, you take it with you take. What the memory of what of you moved forward, and I stepped back. The walls of the room began to change. Photos appeared on them, hundreds, thousands, faces of missing people, most children. Each photo had a small key etched into the corner, and every face looked just slightly wrong, like a mask almost peeled away. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. The children from the dream stood at the door, Sarah, Griggs in front. She looked older now, like she had aged and unraveled at the same time. You left, you see, no, you took the key. I did were never meant to wake then. Why am I here? Because the door never closed? I turned back to the hollow man. He was fading, his shape flickering like static, but his mouth stayed, opened as if waiting for something. I reached into my chest and pulled out the last key. The 9th. It was not made of metal, it was made of memory. I knew what it was the moment I touched it. I saw everything. The fire was never an accident.